Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for the next installment of Virtual Visit with Friends. My name is Marlena White, and on behalf of the Friends of South Carolina Libraries, I'd like to welcome you all here this evening. Before we go ahead and get started, I am going to change our view to galley view. Hello, friends. If you are a current Friends of South Carolina Libraries board member, if you'll give me a quick hello. Give me a quick wave. Hi, Susie. Hey, Paul. Hey, Kitty. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Also, if you are one of the first 10 groups to register for the program and received a free copy of tonight's featured book, No More Duct Tape Fundraising, give us a big thumbs up. All right. Hey, good job, Grant. Tonight's program is designed to be a conversation, but as we get started, I'm going to go ahead and mute all the participants so there's reduced background noise. We are recording this program this evening, and it will be available for viewing on the Friends of South Carolina Libraries YouTube channel. If you have any questions as Rachel is doing her presentation this evening, please go ahead and put them into the chat. I will monitor that, and I will give her those questions as they come in. At the end of the program, we will allow everybody an opportunity, or towards the end of the program, an opportunity to unmute themselves and speak live with Rachel. As we get started, Rachel has asked if everybody will take a moment and in the chat, post one question about fundraising that you would like answered this evening, and that'll give us an idea of how to get started. Rachel, I'd like to introduce you to all of our friends. These are our Friends of South Carolina Libraries. All of these individuals are passionate about supporting and providing funding and awareness for their particular library. Friends, I'd like you to meet Rachel Ramjadden. Having begun her fundraising career at age 12, Rachel took almost 4 decades of experience mentoring more than 500 nonprofit organizations and put it into one book. Recognized as an engaging storyteller, Rachel has spoken to fundraising and social impact audiences nationwide with one goal: make fundraising's best and next practices accessible to everyone. Rachel is on a mission to cut through the noise, hype, and old constructs of raising money to empower anyone who has the time and determination to fuel and finance their mission. She lives in South Florida with her family. Rachel, welcome.
Thank you, Marlena. I'm so honored to speak with all of you tonight and to get a chance to hang out and have a great talk about my favorite topic, fundraising.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. I'll let you go ahead and take it away and start off with your presentation. And I have actually, before we get started, I apologize. We do have a few questions in the chat. First question is, what is the most difficult challenge in fundraising for small groups? We also have, how do we identify targets for our efforts? How do we get over being embarrassed or anxious to ask for money? And what inspired the title of the book? I think that would be a great starting off point.
That sounds good. That third question, I think, might have been addressed just to you, Marlena. If you could copy it into the chat for everyone, that would be great, so I don't forget it. You know, the title of the book actually came out from one of my mentees. I did a lot of focus group sessions in preparation for the book to see what are people interested in learning about, what kind of questions do they have. And I asked a simple question: if your dream for fundraising could come true, what would it be? And she said, no more duct tape fundraising. And I thought, you know, that would be a great book title. So all the credit goes to Carol Mastroianni in Michigan. I was her coach for almost 4 years, and we did some exciting things together to help her nonprofit raise money for drug awareness prevention in the school system. So that was pretty exciting. The third question, how do you get over the embarrassment of asking for money? You know, this is a great question, because a lot of it has to do with our socialization around money. Now, I didn't grow up in this country. I grew up in Jamaica. And so, my mother said the same thing that I'm sure many of your parents told you, don't ask people about money. It's rude, it's bad manners, it's none of your business. And even the very words that we use to describe the solicitation process contain violence in them. So that you say, I don't like when people hit me up for money. So there's this whole social construct around money. So in the book, in one of the chapters, I talk about the shift in mindset that has to happen in order for us to become inspirational fundraisers. So I want you to think of it this way. Instead of asking people for money, you are inviting people to change the world in ways that are meaningful to them. So fundraising is really an invitation, not a solicitation. And those who are in your tribe and care about the causes you do and the work that you're doing, they're going to be happy to give you their money. So I hope that answers the questions.
That's wonderful, Rachel. Thank you so much. All
So
right.
before we dive into the other two, Marlene, I would love to ask all of you a question. And this is always interesting to me because different things in the book resonate with different people. What stood out to you as you read the book, or struck you as holy cow, an aha moment, or gee, I don't know if I would do it that way? So
Rachel, as people are putting some answers into the chat, one thing that really struck out to me is in one of your chapters, you talk about the different types of donors, your ask or your invitation, as you say, may not be the same across the board. So while it's important to come up with your story about your organization, about why you're a fundraising, when you go to take that story out into the world, you may need to tailor it depending on who you are speaking to. That really stood out to me.
absolutely. And if you think of this in the context of literacy, the heart of what you're doing is building literacy in your community. So if you're talking to a group of educators that understand a lot about literacy, you wouldn't talk to them the same way that you would a benefactor that has never been involved in the education system or teaching kids how to read, right? So it seems so obvious, and yet it's one of those common sense things that isn't so common because it's tricky when you're trying to figure out who you're talking to. And so somebody asked a question here, how do we identify targets for our efforts? The answer is it depends. What do you know about them? So just like I mentioned, if you are a teacher or you're talking to a group of teachers, you can be reasonably confident that they have an interest in libraries and books because that's the tools of their craft, right? If you're out in the community at an event and you don't know who you're talking with, you might have to start a little further back in the story and talk about some of the challenges to literacy in your community. The fact that a lot of children in underserved communities grew up in homes where their parents didn't achieve a high level of education, or maybe they're in families where parents are working two jobs to live, and they don't have time to tutor them with homework, and so they're at a disadvantage, and libraries are the place they can go for help. So libraries are so much more than just books. It's really about literacy, which is the foundational opportunity for anybody to move up and become economically mobile. Does that make sense?
It does, Rachel, it does. I've got one question here. If you were going to give a small nonprofit group a starting point, a jumping off point, where do you suggest they start? Do they start with the need? Do they start with their story? Do they start with, who in the community can donate, how much they think? Where should they get started?
So I'm going to type something in the chat. And one of my favorite TED Talks is about by Simon Sinek. It's called Start with Your Why, which was quickly followed with a book called Find Your Why. So typically, if we talk to people, we introduce ourselves, and what's the first question we ask? What do you do, right? And so we focus on the what, and people make an instant decision on whether they're interested or not. So if I was to be in the friends group and somebody asked me what I do, I would say, I raise money for libraries to buy books, right? But if you approach it the other way around from your why and talk about why you do what you do, people will connect with you on a values level first and be interested in what you have to say. So my grandmother was a librarian, and she in London, and then she moved to Jamaica, and she lived in a very rural community. And she noticed that a lot of women were struggling financially because they didn't have good education. And so a lot of the work that she did was around literacy. And so if you were to ask her why, she would say, I believe every child deserves the opportunity to be literate so they can achieve their full potential. When you start with that, there probably isn't a person on the planet that would not agree that every child deserves the right to be educated and to be literate. And so now that you're aligned on the why, what's the next question that people are going to ask? Well, how do you do that? And that's where you get to connect and tell the rest of the story. The problem with starting with the what is people make a decision based on the what you do rather than the why you do it. So if you start out, well, I'm a friend of the library and my job is to raise money to buy books for the library. If they don't want to donate right away or don't have an interest in books, they tune you out. And so the best advice I can give you if you're a small nonprofit is to get clear on your why, both personally and as an organization. And then share that story with people. Because if you find people who love kids, they're going to align with your why and they're going to be easy to engage. If you are talking to a group of business people, they're going to be aligned on the why too, because they need a literate workforce, right? And so it's a lot easier to connect to that level. The second thing I would suggest you do is start with your board members' networks. And I know every board member thinks, oh gosh, I didn't join this board to raise money. But uh, birds of a feather flock together. So if you have a board member, and I'm thinking of Kitty especially, that is passionate about books and learning and all of that, guess what? Kitty's friends are also probably going to share some of those interests too. And so when you can teach your board members how to tell your story about your why and invite their friends to become part of a community of people that share that passion for literacy, it becomes a lot easier to raise money.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Rachel. That's a great idea. You know, a lot of times we can start with, that's a great way to engage our board members is, you know, we may not have our why written up or typed out, and that's okay. But this is a great place to start having these conversations, getting your board members together, having brainstorming sessions. It's a great way to also, you know, connect and have some fellowship with your friends group.
You know, this is my favorite exercise to do with nonprofit leaders and their board members when I do board retreats. I lead them through an exercise and I say, I want you to think of 2 to 3 stories of your life that really shaped who you are as a person. And there's a common thread between those stories. That's your why. So for me, as if you've read in the book, I grew up in a mixed income community where most of the residents were very, very poor. And so my father and mother were very involved in charity work. And they also made sure that we socialized with kids from every economic spectrum imaginable. And then when my father was involved in those activities, we were raising money for causes, and we literally could see the SOS Children's Village being built, or people getting life-saving or eyesight-saving surgeries. So from an early age, that was part of what was ingrained in me by my parents. You know, to whom much is given, much is expected. So when I did this exercise, there was a story of the beggar, which I won't repeat because it's in the book, the story of growing up in that mixed income neighborhood, and then even my volunteer work with the first charity that I really did. And my why, if I was to tell you, is to help people use their talents to change the world. Simple as that. It doesn't say anything about fundraising, but it just happens to be expressed in that way. So when we do this exercise, you'll find that if you do that with your board members, ask them to identify 2 or 3 stories that shaped who they are and finish this sentence. My why is to do what? So what? So my why is to inspire people to use their talents to change the world. So the formula is my why is to do what? So what? And what's so interesting about this exercise is when you do it as a board or even with your staff, you'll find that so many people perceive themselves as being so different, and yet the common thread of service that comes through when you do this exercise shows them how much we have in common. So it's powerful for a lot of ways. And then lastly, when they can do that with their donors, they can start to see, oh my goodness, we all may seem so different, but if we care about the same things, it's a lot easier to work together.
That's a great exercise to do with boards. I think we're always trying to find ways to engage our board members, and try to get these different ideas. That's a great opportunity.
Thank you.
I'm just checking the chat here to see if we have any other questions. We have a comment here about composing your story to be an effective tool, short, sweet, and to the point. Do you have any suggestions for, once you come up with your why, how do you craft the story? How long should it be? What should it include to go out there and invite people to support your organization?
Well, I'll tell you, the first line of the story needs to be your why or include something about your why, because it's your hook to build common ground with people. And the next thing is to trigger empathy and get them to put themselves in the story. So if I were in the Friends in South Carolina, I would say, can you imagine what it feels like to be in a home without books? Because chances are your donors grew up in a very print rich environment, right? Or can you imagine what it feels like to be the only kid in the class that doesn't know phonics? So you're by asking that question, can you imagine, you are about to paint a picture of a problem and asking the reader or the viewer to imagine themselves in that situation. And then I always say emotion empties wallets. So you got to talk about an actual person whose story you can share, who maybe some adult who never learned to read and needed to get their GED and came to classes at your library or checked out books at the library that were geared towards teaching adults to read. But you paint a picture with one human, because people like to give to people, right? And then you talk about the need that's still out there. So maybe you're asking donors to underwrite the cost of bringing in a facilitator to help adults learn to read, because teaching adults to read is a lot different than teaching kids, right? And so then your story, that's a problem. We need to fund this. And basically what you want the reader to leave with is what will happen if they don't act. So if you say, we have 25 people, that adults that need to learn to read, and the only thing between them and literacy is funding to make it happen. Will you help us raise the funds to hire a teacher to work with them for 3 months or 6 months, whatever it is? So right there, the reader is left feeling, shoot, if I don't do my part, 25 people are not going to have opportunity. So the formula that I use is start with a why, because they're going to align with that. Immediately build empathy. So can you imagine what it feels like? Then present the problem. The problem could be that many people in our community had to drop out of school to support their families, and so they're not able to read. What's the solution? We at the library can hire a facilitator to help them learn to read. And then the fifth piece of it is, what is the ask? And the ask is for them to invest and pay it forward to someone that didn't have the opportunities that they did. So Anne asks, is this like an elevator speech where you have 1 minute or less? Um, and I'm not a huge fan of elevator speeches because I find that they come across as very stiff and rehearsed. I like to think of this instead as a conversation. Sometimes it will be a conversation back and forth between two people live, or sometimes it's a conversation where you're sending a letter or making a video or something like that. But you want the tone to be very much a conversational environment where the other person is being invited into the story and having a chance to think, rather than an elevator pitch, which is like, I've got you for 30 seconds. I need to tell you what I'm all about so you can decide if you want to engage further.
It's a great question. Thank you, Anne. I appreciate you sharing that. These are some really great points. Once you have, your why together, you've got it kind of crafted the way you think it's prepared. I love your point about being specific about, this equals that. This dollar amount or this type of donation will do this purpose. I think, if you really have to find that equation. And for our friends here tonight, friends, if you don't know what those equations are, definitely talk to your branch librarian, have a conversation with the staff, with your library director, and find out what these dollar values mean. One membership equals what towards your library and what you can support, or one large donation equals something specific for your summer reading program. One thing, Rachel, I really wanted to touch on is you talked a little bit about the importance of listening in your book, about the importance of listening to your donors and understanding, what they're all about. And that goes a little bit more into tailoring your talk a little bit. How can we listen? What are some tips and techniques that our friends can do to listen to the community and the donors for their particular library?
One of my favorite ways to do it is with a donor survey. If you have the ability to do that, you can use a free tool like Google Forms, which will allow you to gather responses. And I wouldn't have more than, say, 3 questions. It needs to be something that they can do in 2 seconds or less, click, click, click. And ask them about their interests. So maybe you have some donors that, or you ask an open-ended question like, what inspired you to become a donor to this particular organization? Because you're going to hear stories like mine. Well, my grandmother was a librarian and she cared a lot about literacy, right? Second question is, asking donors about their interests. So you have some donors that might give because they are former teachers or, were very involved in education. Then you have others that is about leaving a legacy, so there's lots of little ways like that you can get to know donors. But I would like to just caveat this a couple different ways. First is, not every donor is equal. So in the book, I talk about the Pareto principle, which is 80% of the gifts are going to come from 20% of your donors. Those are the donors you really want to ask those questions of, because they have the capacity to give at high levels. And so when you can personalize the outreach to them based on what you know about them and about their interests, you're going to raise a lot more money. And there's no way you have enough bandwidth to do it for all your donors. So figure out who your top donors are and go with them. Doesn't mean you ignore the bottom 80%, but you can use low touch methods like email to respond to them.
Thank you, Rachel. We've got a question in here. After we've secured the donor and their donation, what's the best way to continue to keep their interest in our group and to secure future donations?
Oh, Kitty, I am so glad you asked that question. So, the number one reason why nonprofits struggle to raise money, because they don't do a good job of impact reporting and donor stewardship. So it's like a leaky bucket. You work so hard to get that first gift, but 6 out of 10 donors never give you a second. And it always comes down to poor stewardship. So if you want to really be able to build a relationship with donors, you want to think of that first gift as the first date. What do you want to do after that? You want to cultivate the relationship. So it's about sending impact stories or success stories of things that have been made possible because they chose to invest. It's about sending prompt thank yous. So in the book, there's a whole chapter on donor stewardship and retention. I would find that one and read it and really go to town on doing those things, because it is less expensive for you to renew an existing donor than it is to go and acquire a new one. So with simple policies and procedures, like we will as an organization decide that we're going to send a thank you within 48 hours. Or if somebody gives at this level, it's going to be a phone call from a board member, things like that. That's what's going to really make the difference. Second, you have donors that are living on fixed incomes, or donors that are raising kids or putting kids through college, who may not be able to give you a ton of money at one single time, but they would be perfectly happy to chip in a few bucks each month for the cost of a Starbucks. A $15 a month donor is worth $180 to you every year. So anything you can do to push what we call recurring giving, or invite people to chip in a little bit every day so they can have the satisfaction of knowing that they are contributing to helping kids become literate every single day. That's the message. And so by becoming a monthly donor, you have the satisfaction of knowing you're doing X every period, single period, day period. And that's the hook. Because then when they wake up in the morning, they feel good because they're doing something good for literacy every single day. So that would be the big thing that I would say you could move the needle on with retention.
Thank you, Rachel. And PayPal makes it so easy now. I've seen now on PayPal where it automatically asks you, would you like to make this a recurring donation? It's just an easy click of a button. So we've got a note in here from Lee. How do we tell donors that we encourage children to read when many have electronic devices and play a lot of games? And I think that speaks specifically to a lot of our friends here this evening. We're all promoting libraries in the community. So I'm going to speak to this just for a second. And then if anyone else has any comments, please put it in there for Lee so that this is something that we could discuss also at the end. But there's nothing that's going to replace reading, regardless of what type of device or game that a child or a young adult is doing. Their reading is still going to be involved. But we do recognize that a lot of interaction and a lot of learning happens through electronics now, as opposed to hardcover books. Although I will tell you, library's still full of books. I don't know about your library, but my library is still full of books. But friends groups have seen that change. Staff has shared that change, that shift in moving from a lot of printed materials to electronic materials. And a lot of the librarians have come right up to the task. There are maker stations and there are programs that revolve around some of the different gaming and electronics. It's not going to go away. So we need to find a way to adapt it and keep the learning in it. So that's a great conversation that you can have with your branch librarian. Your librarians are finding a way to make those types of games and devices and electronics educational. Speak to your staff and see how they're doing it and get the language from them and kind of figure out how we can craft that so we can tell the community, yes, things are shifting and we're changing right along with it.
So I have a couple suggestions for that too, partly because I raised 3 children that are now adults that all love to read, and partly because I used to teach remedial reading to K-12 students. Don't forget the good old school tactics, bribery works wonders. I used to pay my kids 25 cents for every AR test, accelerated reader test that they completed. And we would go to Barnes and Noble and I would tell them you can have any book in the store you wanted. Cost me a fortune, but they all got scholarships to college, so it landed up paying off. And then I would donate those books back to the library when they were finished with them, right? And we also went to the library to do things. But really, it comes down to helping them fall in love with curiosity of learning is really it. That's what makes people read. And so for me, I remember how I fell in love with reading. I had an English as an England teacher from England who was in Jamaica for a long time. She was my 6th grade teacher. And she read us over the entire school year, the Winnie the Pooh series. And she actually had the stuffed animals in the classroom. So as she talked about Pooh saying something, she would lift up Pooh, and then somebody else got to hold Tigger. Another thing that I used to do with kids is helping them become published authors themselves. So sometimes it would be low tech stuff, like literally, stapling a booklet of plain paper together and having them use their imaginations to tell a story, displaying them in the library where everybody can see. And nowadays there are tech tools that do that as well. So, you can literally publish one copy of something. So these are all things that you can do to encourage literacy. But I want to ask you to take it one step further. If we look at our society today, a lot of the polarization that exists because kids do not know, or people in general, not just kids, do not know about something called reliable sources. And so to me, the issue isn't so much teaching people to read. The issue is teaching people to read and question whether that's something from a reliable source. And how do we do that? We look for the same information on multiple sources. So one of the favorite activities I used to do with kids too is to have them look for implicit bias. So I would have something, tell them choose one story in the news. I want you to listen to it on CNN and listen to it on Fox News and see if you can uncover the bias in the story and what are the facts that we can agree on. These days that may not seem like a lot, but those are the skills that are really going to help kids fall in love with reading, because it becomes like a detective project. So they're not just learning to read words for words, but they're actually applying what they learn.
That's wonderful language, Rachel. Thank you. That is very, very helpful. We've got a question here from Grant. This is a great question. A lot of Friends of the Library groups may have a signature fundraiser that raises a lot of money, and it's a great event, but it could be exhausting. And maybe having that event over and over after years and years, maybe it just becomes obsolete, or it's not as fresh as it used to be. So how do we shift from an emphasis on raising funds through events and also book sales? I would put book sales in there with that, to securing donors, repeating donors?
That is a great question. I'm so glad you asked it, because that's one of my pet peeves as a fundraiser. Nonprofits leave money on the table because we don't finish the job of events. What do I mean by that? We host an event, we spend a lot of time selling tickets, making sure everybody has a good time, and maybe we might send a thank you follow-up email, and then it's done, done till next year. But what we don't do is steward those new contacts that we acquired at that event so that we can convert them into loyal donors. So one easy way to do that is come up with a series of emails or printed letter, preferably emails, that you could send out after an event to educate people about your work and invite them into deeper relationship with you. So let's say that you had a book fair and somebody showed up for the first time. What would you want to know then? Maybe the first email that goes out is a thank you for coming in. Maybe the second one is, hey, you might like to meet some awesome people just like you. We're having a social or another, book club on this date. The third thing might be, did you know that 1 in X number of children in South Carolina can't read on grade level? Hey, you could help us do something about that. The fourth one is, guess what? The invitation to donate. So you send it out like what we call a drip campaign, or if you can't automate it, 1 a week for the next 4 weeks, with the last one being a solicitation or an invitation to chip in a few bucks every month, or a one-time gift to help the kids in their community. So you're making it personal. When you do it that way, an event can actually have a much higher return on investment than the traditional way that we do it. Because when we look at it traditionally, we look at the profitability. Okay, it cost us this much to put on the event and we made this much money, done. But when you have a stewardship process afterwards, you continue to acquire and convert donors after the event is gone. At that point, it becomes very profitable. There's one more thing you can do. You can actually look at the events you're doing to calculate what is the return on the investment for the event. So a board will typically look at that as revenue minus expenses is the ROI, the profit, which is the ROI. But they don't count the amount of hours it takes to actually organize that event. So when I worked at Catholic Charities, we used to have this awful event every year. It was one of those fancy schmancy galas that people paid obscene amounts of money to attend, to see and be seen, and ate rubber chicken and pretended they were having a good time, right? I hated it. And it would take us almost 8 months to plan, 3 of us, and they would net less than $100,000 off that event. And so when I became the development director, I went to our CEO, not knowing that this was his favorite event because he liked to hobnob with the hobnobs. And I'm like, dude, this is a losing proposition. You have 3 staff members that earn this much. They're spending 8 months of their year doing this. You're actually losing money on this event. If you let me drop this gala, I will make you more money than you've made from here. And it was a simple thing of, instead of having one big event, we had 10 signature events, and there were little events that were tied to the mission of each division. So for the Head Start program, which is all about pre-K and early childhood education, we had a family day. And so we would pick one vendor that sponsored the gala and make them the lead sponsor of that event. And of course, all the money came to us instead of paying the hotels. That one simple shift moved us from raising less than 100,000 a year, or netting, I should say, less than $100,000 a year to over $250,000. And he used to joke, he would say, okay, you can work another month. But it was also less frustrating for the staff because we were smart. We were able to outsource a lot of the doing, so we didn't have to do it, and we didn't have to pay through the nose to do it either. We also had a refugee program. They would do a wine and cheese night at an Italian deli. Literally, all we had to do was sell the tickets for $30 each, and however many showed up, we paid them $15 a head. So they hosted, set up, cleaned up everything. I mean, okay, we only made like 10 to 15,000 on a night, but guess what? No staff time. So that's what I mean by calculating the ROI on events. If you were to include $25 an hour times however many hours it takes to plan, are you really making money?
Excellent point. That's a very, very good point. And I liked in your book, you talk about how to kind of, keep track of those of the contact with the new donors or someone who's attended a new event. I love your plan to kind of use a literal calendar and go through the months of the year and send your emails holiday themed, or different times of the year, or just keeping them up to date on what's going on in the library. So not every email is, please, oh please, we're so desperate for money, but informing them and educating them about your organization so that you start to bring them in.
Yeah, 3 touches between asks. So you got to touch them 3 times in between asking them for money. And you all are coming up for back to school time. I want to talk about this awful experience we've been through this last year and what it has to do with literacy. During COVID, I coached a couple of organizations involved in literacy work, and they're like, how do we compete with food banks and emergency services? And I said, very easily. First, you talk about the fact that literacy is the key to economic mobility. So the people affected by the pandemic the most were people in low-skilled jobs that didn't have that support system and safety network. They don't earn enough to be able to save. The second, you talk about the disproportionate educational experiences there. So people that live in communities of color are less likely to have access to good schools. And third, you talk about where would we all be in this pandemic if there weren't brilliant minds like Dr. Fauci. So we may think literacy doesn't matter because the payoff is 20 years from now, but we are literally laying the bricks that our children and grandchildren will rely on to solve the complex problems that will come up in their generation. It creates that sense of urgency that we need to have literacy because we need clever workforces to solve complex problems together and address the inequity in our communities.
Thank you, Rachel. That's a great point. So you were talking in the beginning about, sometimes bribery works about, with your children. I mean, it really can. Talk a little bit about, invigorating your board, invigorating your volunteers to get out there. Do you suggest, a token system or a reward system, a recognition system? Is that a way to help get the board involved? We're all going to go out there and try to raise this amount of money. We're going to, or, get 5 new members apiece or 2 new members apiece.
I don't really recommend a one-size-fits-all for everybody. There are certain board members that will resonate with. Like me, I'm very competitive. I would be all over that. But I'm also an extrovert. So I could talk to a rock and invite them to make a difference in the world through literacy. There are others who are introverts. And the idea of soliciting someone directly is enough to trigger major anxiety. For those folks, challenging them to do that is going to be demotivational. So I would say this, if you look at the stewardship chapter, talking about delighting your donors, there are some things that are well suited to extroverts and some things that are well suited to introverts. If you wanted to punish me, you could tell me to sit in a board meeting and write 20 handwritten notes to people to thank them for giving. If you wanted to make me light up, how cool is this? Give me 10 donors to call to thank and make them feel like $1 million. So when you look at your board members, our tendency is to require the same thing of everybody, but we shortchange ourselves in that process. There are some of us that are introverts, some that are extroverts. Play to people's strengths. And I always advise you to, when somebody joins your board, ask them, why did you join the board? What are you hoping to get out of the experience? How can we help make sure that you do that? So you might have a young person who's a young professional that's looking for leadership experience so that they can move up in their career. Then give it to them. Give them the chance to go out in the community and give talks on your behalf, or to serve on the finance committee or things like that. So the key is to reduce the anxiety that board members have and play to people's strengths. So if you have somebody that's going to be really anxious about asking for money, don't make them ask for money. Put them on the donor happiness committee and make them write 100 thank you notes if that's what makes them happy, right? But you don't let them off the hook entirely. You say, look, we just want you to make a friendly introduction and somebody else will make the ask. And I'll finish with this one story because I know you want to open up for questions. One of the quickest gifts I ever solicited in Miami was for the homeless shelter. There was a foundation that gave $60,000 a year every year, but they had the capacity to do a lot more. Long story short, we were having an event with access to high dollar donors for the first time. And so I wanted to raise a matching gift so that we could raise more money. So I didn't know this president of this foundation personally, but the friends of the shelter, the president knew him, and he also knew our program director. So the three of us went to this meeting. So the friend requested the meeting, and he took it because he was a personal friend of hers. When we went in, she did the initial greeting and small talk. The program director shared a quick win that would make him feel good about the investments he'd already made. And me, who had never met him in his life, hit him up with this wonderful opportunity that we have to leverage high dollar donors, and we need a matching gift of 10,000. And in less than 30 seconds, he said yes. And as we were walking out, he said to me, my God, I've never given that much money to somebody that is a total stranger to me. You're good. I said, no, I'm not good. I knew what you're interested in. I knew his foundation was big on matching gifts because they like to leverage other dollars in the community. And I knew he cared about the mission. So it really wasn't so much about the skill level. Now, how did that president feel? She, who was initially reluctant to even make the call, looked at me and said, how did you do that? And when you have total alignment like that, you can ask with confidence. So the person on the board doesn't have to do the asking, they just have to help you make friends. So I like to call that friend raising rather than fundraising.
That's fantastic, friend raising. All right, friends, I hope you all jotted that one down. I also hope you all jotted down donor happiness committee, because I think we all need to be adjusting our bylaws right now to be adding a donor happiness committee. I like that because that can mean a lot of different things. Like you said, we may need to cultivate and make some of those donors happy through face-to-face interaction. We may need to make them happy by sending them a note or sending them, an update or making a phone call. So there's a lot of different ways that can happen. All right, I'd love to hear from some of our friends. I know, friends, that we have a lot of different avenues for raising money with the Friends of the Library organization. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they are a challenge. So I'm going to go ahead and, you're welcome to take yourself off of mute if you'd like to join us. I'm going to go ahead and put a note here. If anybody would like to take themselves off mute, ask a question, or share a story, share a success. I know a lot of our big fundraisers, the Friends of the Irmo Library had their in-person murder mystery, and that got derailed with COVID, and they moved to a virtual format. The Friends group, so it's do we go back to that? Are we going to lose some of the people that we had with that? The organization that I was involved with for many, many years had a very large father-daughter dance, and we were very blessed to be able to hold that dance about 3.5 weeks before the world shut down. But I don't know if we're ever going to be able to get back to having that size event again. I'd also be curious to see if anybody had any interest or thoughts or experience with grants, about the time and effort it takes to put into a grant, depending on, and then correlation to the amount of money that you get out. So, All right, friends. Who's got a question? Who's got a comment?
Marlene, I have a question for the group. I'm curious to know, talking about fundraising, do any of the friends groups actually set a fundraising target on an annual basis? Versus just kind of ad hoc? We have 2 book sales, we have a mystery dinner, and whatever we get out of those, that's our fundraising for the year, plus our memberships. Actually set a goal, a fundraising goal on an annual basis?
That's a great question, Grant. I'd love to hear people's thoughts. You're welcome to put that into the chat, or you're welcome to share if your friends group has a specific fundraising goal. I would think that most of us have like an annual budget that we put together, and the income is what we are hoping that we're going to raise through the different avenues, whether it be membership, book sales, activities, events, or donors. And as people are coming up with thoughts and coming up with things to share, Rachel, how would an organization look at what they have and try to put together a goal? Is because you don't want to set a goal too high, and you don't want to set it too low too. What if you're looking at your organization, what are some of the factors that you should look at when you're trying to set that goal?
So in the chapter on creating a fundraising plan, I tell you exactly how to do that. So if you have the benefit of historical data, it's a lot easier to do. And so what I would suggest you do is look at how many donors you had in the last 12 months. And see if you know what your retention rate is, then you just multiply what they gave by the retention rate, right? So if you had 1,000 donors and they gave you $100,000, and your donor retention rate is 40%, then those same donors will give you 40,000 this year, right? And that reflects the ones that you're going to lose. If you don't know what your donor retention rate is, you can calculate it. And the formula is in the book. I won't bore you with math because we're already in a Thursday evening where brain cells are fried, right? Or close to being there. If you have no clue and don't want to do math, the average nonprofit's retention rate is somewhere around 40%. So if you wanted to take the quick way out, you would look to see how much did donors give me last year and multiply it by 40%. And that will give you what we call the renewable revenue is. Then you want to add in your events. So if you have book sales and they tend to raise $1,000 each and you're going to do 10 of them, then you have that as a line item. And so literally you go through all the different sources of revenue that you have and try to predict based on what you've done in the past, what's going to happen in the present. And so in the book, I think there's a template in there. Certainly I describe the process for doing it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. As we are inviting friends to come on and share any other successes that you've had with fundraising, any other challenges that you have, or any other questions that you may have for Rachel. Rachel, I'm going to go ahead and put a link into the chat on how they can get a copy of your book.
Thank you. So this would be a good time for me to ask all of you, if I didn't put you to sleep in the book, reviews are how people find books on Amazon. So, if you were one of the lucky recipients of the 10 copies and you'd like to leave a review, please do that. If you didn't buy it on Amazon, then if you just take a picture of the front cover of the book and upload it so they know you're a legit reviewer, they'll leave it there. Otherwise, they tend to delete them. But, reviews help other people to find books. And many people find that having read the book themselves, they like their boards to read it because it really brings that common understanding of that we're all working from the same place. So, feel free to pass on your copy to someone else or gift them a copy too, but that would really help me.
Thank you, Rachel. Nothing says literacy like having written your own book.
I'll tell you a funny story. My grandmother would have been 110 this year. And when the internet came, she was convinced that we were going to turn into a bunch of illiterate bozos because we no longer had to read actual books. So, the times do change. But I think she would be very proud that somehow I managed not to become illiterate, even though I used the internet and all these electronic reading situations that were so mystical to her.
That's funny. We've got a question here. We've got a friends group, Susie with the Friends of the McCormick County Library. They've got a used bookstore that brings in consistent sales. It's a popular bookstore. It's in a very prominent location and it's very well maintained. But they're looking to start a capital campaign because they're going to need to either do major renovations to their library branch or find another location. That's a huge project. Any tips on how to get started on a capital campaign?
Sure. So the first thing I would say is make sure you're gathering people's names and contact information, preferably an email address for every person that walks through your door. Even if it means you give away free books or they have the chance to win something, just to get them to sign up. Second is, in a capital campaign, there are different phases of the campaign. So in the early stage, we call that the quiet phase. So basically you want to raise 30% of your goal before you even announce the campaign, right? Because people don't like to jump on an empty bus. So what you'll do is you'll go to your most consistent donors or your major donors, and you say, look, we're going to launch this campaign. We need to get a strong start. Would you be willing to make a commitment or invest during the quiet phase? And then once you announce it, you can use a combination of direct solicitations of people and events and all kinds of things to actually move the needle along. But there is one thing that a lot of consultants will tell you, that you need to do what they call a feasibility study, which costs tens of thousands of dollars. Rubbish. You don't need that. Not unless you're going to spend a lot of money printing fancy brochures and all that. What you do need to do is look at your donor base to see realistically, where is this money going to come from? And so if you Google gift table, and there's a calculator, gift table or capital campaign calculator, or gift table calculator. You put in the dollar amount that you want to raise. I think it's by Mark Pittman from the Fundraising Authority, if I'm not mistaken. But you put in the dollar amount you want to raise, and it tells you if you want to raise this much money, you need 1 gift at this size, 2 gifts at this size, 3 gifts at this size. And then you look through your donor list and you start to look at, well, who could we put into which bucket? So if you have a donor that's giving you $250,000, you could put them in probably count on them to do $250,000 towards a capital campaign. And you'll want to invite 3 times as many people as the gifts that you have. So if you need 3 $250,000 gifts, you need to invite 9 people to contribute at that level in the hope of catching 3. So that's a short answer, but we could teach a whole class on capital campaigns. Andrea Kilstedt, I'll type her name in the chat. She is the guru of capital campaign, capital campaigns. And if you look at her book on Amazon, she wrote 2 fabulous books. One's on capital campaigns. The other one is a book I recommend every time. It's called How to Train Your Board and Everyone Else to Fundraise. It's like a cookbook of exercises you can do with your board and staff that take 15 minutes each. You literally photocopy the pages or scan them and send them. And then it basically helps people to build fundraising skills. So she's a good person to check out if you have a capital campaign coming.
Thank you, Rachel. That's excellent information. I would like to throw in there real fast too. Sometimes nonprofit groups feel obliged to get a donor database software system. You may look, some organizations, you may find that that's going to be useful, but if you can work an Excel spreadsheet, you're going to be able to track your donors there. Excel is a pretty readily available program, and it can do a lot of different things, and it's probably going to cost you $0. So, and it's also a program that is compatible for many different people. You can share that Excel database and lots of different people can open it. So I would definitely suggest, start basic. If you feel like you need to upgrade after that, that's fine. Start basic.
And if you're looking for any kind of software, TechSoup.org is a fantastic organization where you can purchase things for a fraction of the cost because the publishers donate to TechSoup. So they do have, I believe Bloomerang is on TechSoup, available there.
TechSoup is a fantastic resource and wonderful for 501c3s. We've got a note in here from Kitty. She's wondering about how many of our attendees this evening actually do focus on big donors as opposed to groups who, probably like my friends group is a little bit more, focused on, smaller events, things like book sales, things like author events, maybe, like a gala or like a dance or like a tea party or like a murder mystery or something along those lines. Are any friends with us this evening already kind of cultivating larger donors in their community? And as we're waiting to see if anybody puts anything or please take yourself off mute. You're welcome to share. Rachel, I'd like to ask one final question. What's the difference, or in your opinion, what's the benefits or negatives to soliciting, a donor versus a kind of a corporate sponsor? Are they the same thing? Is a sponsorship the same as a donor? Are there two different programs? And in your opinion, is there one that's maybe a little bit more beneficial to a nonprofit than another?
Well, I'm a big fan of building individual giving programs focused on individuals. But some individuals will give through their companies or their corporations or their foundations. That said, they are two very different things. So when you're thinking of a corporate sponsor, the sponsor is getting something of value in exchange for the money they're paying you. So it's not a tax deductible gift. They are paying you and buying whatever it is you're offering them. So if you have a gala and they're sponsoring your gala, they're buying access to your attendees, basically, right? With a donation, it's an outright gift. So there's a really good guy named Chris Bayless. I'm going to type his his name in the chat for you. He is like the guru of corporate sponsorships, and he has a free course. It's a webinar that he teaches. It's a lead magnet for a program that he sells, which I think is like $300 or something. But I haven't seen it myself, but several of my coaching clients purchased it and we're very happy with it. But basically he tells you how to structure corporate partnerships or sponsorships that are mutually beneficial and that make sponsors want to sponsor your event. So it's not we are a wonderful cause and we think you should sponsor us. It's more a case of, hey, you need a highly educated workforce. Libraries are a key part to making that happen. So you lead with the what's in it for them. And then there are ways you can share impact afterwards that make them more likely to renew. My preference is definitely for individual donors because those tend to stick around for longer, even though the dollar amounts are less sometimes.
Thank you for that. It's always it can get a little bit confusing about, where this particular donor falls. And, we hear some big events, they have all of these sponsorships and they raised all this money and our eyes get really wide and we think, well, how can we do that? But you have to be careful too. We certainly don't want the summer reading program sponsored by Budweiser. We need to kind of find the right fit for our organization. Got a great question in here.
One last thing I want to say, don't forget to talk to your local community foundation. You need to make friends with the program officer there because a lot of affluent people have things called donor advised funds. So basically they get a bigger tax write-off if they give a big chunk of money to a donor advised fund, to a community foundation, and then say, hey, cut checks to all these charities that I care about. So if you make friends with the program officer, and they will know which of their donor advised funds are interested in literacy and things for kids or adults with, trying to overcome economic mobility issues, and they'll be able to recommend to you or recommend to those donors, hey, there's this great library foundation that you might be interested in supporting.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Rachel, we've got some great comments in the chat, thanking you for your time this evening, thanking you for your expertise. We really do appreciate it. Friends, I hope you will go out. If you do not already have a copy of Rachel's book, please go ahead and get a copy for your board. I think it's a valuable investment for your nonprofit organization, for your friends group. And also, once you get that book, review it on Amazon for Rachel. Well, speaking of inviting your donors, if you've enjoyed this program this evening, friends, I would invite you to join the Friends of South Carolina Libraries, either as a personal member, as a group member, or through a donation. That's available on our website, which is www.fossil.org. This organization, it really is a team effort, and we would love to have new team members. If you're interested in being a part of this organization and the different events and products and programs that we put on, please consider joining us on the board. I promise we are a fun-loving bunch. We love the Zoom. As a statewide organization, we've had more Zoom meetings in the last 18 months than we've probably had in the last 9 years. So, that without the burden of travel, you can definitely get involved and help support library friends groups across the state on our board. In fact, our next board meeting is coming up on August 13th at 10 a.m. So if you are interested, please reach out. If you know someone who may be interested, give me their number. I'll be happy to give them a call. I too love to call people. Thank you again for joining us, everybody, this evening. If you've got any further questions for Rachel, you're welcome to email us at fossilpresident@gmail.com, and we can connect you with Rachel. Also, I'd like you to save the date. The next virtual visit with friends is going to be Thursday, October 21st at 6 p.m. This is going to be a fun one, friends. We are going to be on location at the new location of the Pat Conroy Literary Center, and we're going to get a behind-the-scenes tour, and Jonathan Haupt is going to talk to us about growing a nonprofit basically from, you know, dirt and spit. So he built that nonprofit from the ground up, literally, and he's going to have some tips about supporting and sustaining your nonprofit. Also, we're very excited to announce that the 2021 Fossil Annual Conference is scheduled for Friday, November 5th. We're working on the details of that, and we hope to have that out to the public soon and followed shortly by registration. So, Rachel, I'd like to have you come on and say one final goodbye and, you know, any parting words of wisdom for our friends.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for all the work you do for literacy in your communities. You know, when we look at all the major problems we have in the world, so many of them could be solved if people had a greater rate of literacy. So to me, there's nothing more foundational than the work that you're doing. So thank you all. Thank you for hanging with me. I hope you'll keep in touch. I'm on LinkedIn, on Facebook. Feel free to connect with me. And for goodness sakes, let me know when you're doing great things. I'm always happy to share your events if I can. So, you know, please don't be strangers.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you. Thank you so much, friends. Thank you for joining us this evening.
It was amazing. Thank you.
Wonderful. Good night, everyone.